So we mention this, and we need to mention this, and we need to talk about it, because now the president routinely makes war, undeclared war, without checking in with Congress, without consulting the legislative branch, as he constitutionally is obligated to do. Well, I suppose the Congress, that isn't quite accurate. The Congress has to declare the war, and then the president can become, then the president acts as commander-in-chief. But regardless, this is happening. There's been a return to the vigorous exercise of presidential war powers without any legitimate national security threat to the country. Obama, in the last administration, you can see this with Libya, Trump, Somalia. So recent arguments really revolve around this fact that since the end of the Cold War, the president can do really whatever he thinks is necessary to protect against a perceived national security threat without consulting the Congress. And this isn't working too well now. I mean, we have endless war. I mean, in Friday's class, they were telling me that the youngest, the soldiers who are over in Afghanistan now, fighting in Iraq and all that, weren't even alive when 9/11 happened. I happen to know from my own research. I'm 30 years old. Some of you are my age. Some of you are a little younger. We've been at war all of my life. Certainly all of yours, if you were 18, 19, 20. Certainly all of yours. Is that a good thing? No, that's something for you to decide for yourself. But what is the national security threat? What is the national security threat? Well, we have to look at what national security means, because this is what's taken Congress out of the loop in these decisions. The national security threat, that's left to the president's discretion. National security means anything that the president wants it to mean. And that's just the truth of it. There is no set definition of what the national security is or what it entails. That's up to the president at the time. So that's why we see, sometime, not particularly from Obama to Trump, but such shifts from administration to administration on what the United States needs to be doing abroad, if anything. So Congress really has one power. That's the Trump card here. It's to defund the military. Congress has the power of the purse. More particularly, the House of Representatives has the power of the purse. Will that ever happen? I sincerely doubt it. Because what's going to happen to Congress people if they decide it's a good idea to defund the military? Their re-election campaigns probably won't go well. So it's a hard decision to make, and an unpopular one, once hostilities have started to even threaten this. So Congress and the president, any president, Trump, Obama, Clinton, Bush the elder, Bush the younger, all of them are misbehaving. Congress is not doing its job by refusing to check the president in the regards of war power. Congress, the war power, Congress's ability to declare war applies even in a limited war, in a limited capacity. They can grant letters of marque and reprisal. And a letter of marque, I think I went over this in the last unit. I'll briefly touch on it again. A letter of marque was what was given to people who own ships in the new United States in order to protect us until we had a navy. So if there was a ship that could fit a cannon or 2 or 3 or 20, or the more the better, they would get a letter of marque if they applied for it from the U.S. Congress saying you have our permission to go out and sink British ships or Spanish ships or whatever the problem country was at the time, and you're not going to get in any trouble with us. We'll thank you for it even. That's very generically what a letter of marque is. Legalized piracy, you can think of it that way. So after the Cold War, presidents of both parties have claimed that right to initiate hostilities without any congressional approval. And the first instance of that was Korea. Truman, and this is the only time this has happened on UN authorization, Truman didn't consult Congress and went in on the UN's okay, which no American president has done since, at least as far as I'm aware. And the practice of doing this has become endemic. It's become really deep-seated since the end of the Cold War. Since the Soviets went away, there hasn't been a great enemy to fight. We were the only superpower left on the stage. So what do you do when there's no enemy to fight? Or no big enemy, no big bad wolf? The issue has gotten murkier and murkier and murkier as the years have gone on. So Congress can declare war. Congress should declare war. Congress can also preclude certain actions from being taken. Certain actions from being actions. Okay. Well, that'll have to do for the moment. So they can preclude certain actions from being taken. So, for instance, during the quasi-war with France in the Adams Senior administration, Congress said, okay, you can use force. You can use the armed forces. You can, however, you can't use land forces. You can't use the infantry. The Navy's fair game. Defend our shores. No land forces. And that's certainly within congressional power to do that. Congress can also forbid the deployment of certain weapons in a declaration of war. They can also set rules on how we're going to treat prisoners of war. And these were powers and are powers that help perpetuate a limited government in the United States. Because while we need an energetic chief executive, an energetic president to help secure our rights, he has to be responsible to somebody, namely the U.S. Congress, in his war-making powers. So he's not going against what we want. Do we, the governed, want to send our boys and spend our treasure and our time over in a far-off land that many of us don't think has anything to do with anything that America is about? You know, it's a question. It's a good question. So Congress, though, can't micromanage the president's running of a conflict, which is why the war is declared. The conditions are set if Congress chooses to go that far, but it's ultimately up to the president. But the meaning of everything that we've been talking about really changes and can change drastically depending upon the view of what the government's supposed to be doing. As the founders' conception of what the government is supposed to be doing was rejected, and it has been in many ways, you see a change in what the meaning of justice is. What is justice? How does one administer justice? How does one get justice for oneself? And different types of policies flow from this, and how the Constitution is interpreted. We talked about earlier in the semester a loose reading of the Constitution, loose constructionists and strict constructionists. So if right going to be secured, we have to have a certain set of policies in place. A certain set of policies is required as a nation. We have to have policies that maintain our independence, American independence. You can't secure rights of anybody. I mean, if we are subordinated in some way to another nation, if we're in, dead up to our eyeballs to China, are we really independent as a country? It's something to think about. And this is a theme you should have seen in Washington's farewell address when you read that. So the war power. So we must have a navy to protect our insular situation. Okay, this removes us from the affairs of other great powers. We are very fortunate as a country geographically to be separated from most of the rest of the world by two great oceans. Now the world is becoming a smaller place, and that's becoming less and less of a protection, but it still is, because especially back in the day, when we're talking about the foundation of the country, our Navy could keep us from being dominated by Britain and France. Hopefully the Navy would have been good enough to stop the great powers from coming over here and imposing their will on us. Political insulation. So the founders, again, they weren't isolationists. They were not isolationists in any way. Washington's farewell address was not an advocation for isolationism. I know some of you said that it was in your flip grid. That isn't true. The founders wanted good relationships with all countries, to be friendly with all, especially when it came to trade, because trade is and was the lifeblood of any good economy. And a wealthy nation can protect itself better and preserve its independence. Why? Well, the wealth can buy troops, the wealth can buy ships, the wealth can buy everything needed to defend oneself against a foreign foe. The founder endorsed the idea of trading with anyone who wanted to trade with us in good faith and on fair terms. They weren't picky. We needed the help, we needed the credit at the beginning of our history as a nation. So when we started looking, especially during the Jeffersonian era, his term of office, towards westward expansion, they thought that it was necessary at the time. The people in charge thought it was necessary to secure our rights and independence, that we have control of the continent from the Atlantic to the Pacific. So this is a good thing. Sure, when it's done through peaceful acquisition, like the Louisiana Purchase. I was about to say Napoleon. We bought the land from Napoleon. Why that was done that was a square deal. Napoleon's representatives said, this much for this many acres. We cut a check. Hey, the land's ours. Great. Peaceful, legal. It's done. But maybe this isn't such a good thing when we talk about territories we took by force from Mexico in the Mexican-American War. Now, am I advocating giving them back? No, I'm just presenting you with a point of view. So these territories, when they became states, had to, by necessity, be admitted on equal terms with the others. Because you couldn't have the 13 colonies have some sort of, which were now states, have some sort of special status. That would not have been equitable or fair as for the country. So we had expansion back then for national security purposes. We needed to secure Louisiana, meaning the Louisiana Territory, in this case, from France to secure the Mississippi River, because we didn't have control of it. And the French kind of took advantage of that a little bit to mess with our trade. And again, trade is the lifeblood of an economy, and we were having a little, maybe a little trouble jump-starting ours. So most of America, again, was also underpopulated. It was a lot of land, especially when we started doing that westward push, and we didn't have enough people to fill it. So we had to guard against others stepping into our affairs. So maybe, it wasn't all filled, but we would certainly have a warning. We might have an army outpost. We might have some sort of guard out there that could maybe sound an alarm if someone was on the way to a more populated area. Get the army ready. So this is, I think what our foreign policy was supposed to be from the beginning. This is JQA is John Quincy Adams, former president of the United States. He says on July 4th, 1821, in an address, "But she goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. She is the well-wisher to the freedom and independence of all. She is a champion and vindicator only of her own." And I really think that was what he nailed it. I really think that was what the intention was when it came to our foreign policy. I think that was certainly the intention of the founders. So we should set a good example at home. We should protect our independence. And in doing these things, that's the best example. That's the best way we can show the rest of the world how to live, how to be, how to do this experiment of running a new country right. They thought it was unjust to rule others without their consent. Now, the contradiction in that statement, some of the contradictions in other statements have not been lost on me. I'm not addressing them in depth because we're talking about the presidency and the war powers. But I am aware I'm not trying to gloss over them. This is just way beyond what we're trying to do. So ruling others without their consent doesn't work very well either. And slavery was the great challenge here in domestic and foreign affairs. As much as we wanted to write about how all men were created equal, how we were all the same under the eyes of the Lord, how all these wonderful things that mean so much. The fact that we had slaves showed that we as an American people thought it was okay to rule others without their consent. And that isn't right. That doesn't work well. That isn't any way to conduct yourself. So we come to the Spanish-American War, and we start to see a more progressive view of what justice is and what a president can do domestically. This leads to a different view of led to a different view of what the government should do abroad. This progressive sort of American imperialism led to us going around the world really to try to raise people up from their wretched conditions, and this really did away with any sort of limited government model we may have still had as of 1898. And certainly nothing was connected to the American national interest. So a great example is the Philippines. We took that territory. That territory came into our possession through war. We didn't take it, but the government, people wanted to go to places like the Philippines and raise them up to be quasi-Anglo-Saxon. These people were certainly being ruled without their consent in the Philippines, and they didn't want us over there. They didn't particularly want the Spanish over there either. They didn't want to be quasi-Anglo-Saxon. They were just fine the way they were. But, I guess the thinking was, what did they know? Roosevelt, Teddy, not FDR, he said, fundamentally the cause of expansionism is the cause of peace. So, and this was the whole progressive imperialist movement of the late 19th and early 20th century. That if there are more people like us, if there are more quasi-Anglo-Saxon folk around the world who have a McDonald's on every block and who have a Walgreens on every block and who have Apple iPhones and all these things that we do in America and in the West, then there's going to be less of a likelihood of war. Now, there are all sorts of problems with that statement, too. Again, kind of beyond the scope, but I don't want you to think that I don't recognize the holes in what I'm saying, because I very much do. But this, again, is a different point of view that I want to present to you, because, again, I don't think you probably would have heard this in a former government class or your high school civics or whatever your high school called it. So later progressives really kept up this idea of uplifting the masses, making them more like us, whether they wanted to be or not, and they didn't, but turned it towards an idea of international progressivism. So they wanted to work through international institutions instead of just going in by force themselves to achieve policy goals. And the League of Nations was kind of where this started. So the League of Nations, later the United Nations after World War II, they didn't work well. The United Nations is a great place for world leaders to come and talk and try to set aside differences. Is it good for a whole lot more than that? That is truly it is a debatable question. So progressives, though, because this didn't work, thought we weren't trying hard enough. So from FDR on, kind of the mantra was we need to eliminate fear and want around the world. So from the 1940s to today, and if we eliminate fear and want around the world, there's going to be a less likelihood of war, more peace. So from the 1940s, there was an increased emphasis on delivering economic and technological aid to those countries that needed it. This was, again, supposed to take away the causes of conflict, the causes of war. Didn't work. We still had Korea, Vietnam, just to name two. But we still kept trying, 1990, 1991, and we're still kind of doing this stuff now with very little regard toward what American national security is. But we haven't given up trying to export modern-day liberalism, not Democratic Party, just how our way of life around the world. So that is it. Thanks for listening.